Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today we're discussing the new Apple TV Plus series Dark Matter, premiering this week. So briefly, Dark Matter is based on a novel by the same name. It follows a physicist who is kidnapped and sent to a parallel universe in which another version of his life unfolds because of a different choice he made previously. The book draws on the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, that every possible outcome of every event creates a new universe that runs parallel to our own. This idea of parallel universes is not something new. It's been investigated in many TV shows and movies, and it is a topic that I'm always interested in. The series stars Joel Edgerton and Jennifer Connelly as doomed lovers Jason and Daniela, and I felt the chemistry between them was very convincing and very strong. So far, I'm hooked because of Joel Edgerton's performance. He plays two versions of himself, and he manages to make them feel like two totally different people. I also like the aesthetic of the series, especially in episode 2. It does feel like a thriller, and I feel very invested in terms of finding out where this story goes. I haven't read the book, so please don't spoil anything for me. In terms of pacing, the series gets to the point right away. And my first impression of Jason is that he's a very kind-hearted, easygoing man who's devoted his life to his family. He's a professor, but his students don't really find him all that engaging. And the series uses his lectures to try to explain to the audience why Jason is going through what he's going through. The first time we see Jason at work, he's trying to explain something called Schrodinger's cat to his students. And this is a very famous thought experiment in quantum physics. The experiment involves placing a cat in a sealed box along with a device that has a 50% chance of killing this cat and checking in on the cat after an hour. And of course, common sense would dictate that this cat has a 50% chance of survival. However, the theory argues that the cat is both alive and dead at the same time. It exists in two states prior to opening up the box to confirm whether or not the cat is dead. And this idea of existing in two states is actually not that far-fetched and is the reason that one version of Jason is able to kidnap another version of Jason and take over his life. Even before this whole drama begins, Jason was trying to experiment with this idea of traveling through parallel universes. It's just he almost beat himself to the punch. One night, his life changes when he decides to reluctantly go out and meet with an old friend named Ryan. Ryan is everything Jason could have become and more, and actually did become in a parallel universe. Ryan is this multimillionaire who's won all these awards. He's considered like a renowned genius, and he offers Jason a job at his multi-million-dollar company. But unfortunately for Ryan, Jason is very content with his life, and although he hasn't achieved everything that he's wanted in his career, he's still very happy. He's a man with no regrets. And this is something that the series makes very clear early on. On his way home, he is kidnapped by a man in a mask, and we later find out that he kidnapped himself. He wakes up to find himself in quarantine, surrounded by all these people he has never seen before in his life. While Jason is trying to figure out what just happened, the second version of Jason that we're introduced to has totally swapped places with him and is starting to acclimatize to his new life. So we find out in episode 2 that the second version of Jason swapped places with this first version of Jason, I guess you could say, in order to live a different type of life. He has a lot of regrets, and he wants to go back in time and undo them all. Unfortunately, it's at this Jason's expense. This first Jason that we were introduced to, that was so charming, that was so kind, right? He was kidnapped by this evil version of himself. We get to episode 2, and episode 2 leaves off exactly where episode 1 left off. And I think what hooked me in episode 2 is the differences between Jason 1 and Jason 2. They really feel like totally different people. So we'll discuss Jason too because I find him to be very fascinating. This second version of Jason that we're introduced to in this parallel universe, he feels like a much colder version, a much more detached, a much more calculated version. We find out that one of his life regrets is not actually marrying the love of his life, Daniela, and he went through with this experiment in order to basically undo the mistake. He wants to live that family life. However, we find out quite quickly that this version of Jason is not really cut out for that. And just because you can go back and change your life, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're making the right decision. And it doesn't necessarily mean that everything will work out exactly as you want it to. So this second version of Jason, again, he comes off as very cold. Even like his whole vibe totally changed. The way he walks into a classroom, he's a man that demands respect. And as hard as he tries to climatize to this new life, he just doesn't strike me as an individual that's going to place his family over his work. And meanwhile, so the series goes back and forth between the first Jason and the second Jason. And the first Jason that we met, that humble, very cool guy, is suffering. He is in a panic. He thinks he hasn't actually realized what has taken place. So he actually goes to the hospital thinking that he's lost his mind. And what I find very fascinating about this first Jason is in this new world, he's incredibly successful. He's achieved all his, like, he achieved everything that he's always dreamed of. And yet none of this interests him. He's not interested in the awards. He's not interested in the fame. All he wants to do is find his wife and his child. That's the only thing he's interested in. He doesn't care about anything else. And of course, when he finds her, she doesn't recognize him. And I think what I found most impressive about the second episode is how different everyone feels. It's almost like his success came at everybody else's expense. For example, his friend Ryan is overweight. He's not this charismatic multimillionaire that we met in episode 1, offering Jason the job of a lifetime. It actually seems that this successful version of Jason, this kind of evil, dead version of Jason, may have become successful at his expense. Again, this second version of Jason feels like a user, and Ryan looks like someone who was used. First, Jason manages to reconnect with his wife, who totally doesn't recognize him, and he tries to explain the situation. He tries to explain that, listen, I am not crazy. I don't know where I am. Somebody needs to help me. And of course, they look at him like he's totally out of his mind. And what I find very interesting is how different everything feels. When Jason first tries to go to his family home, everything is different. It's a lot darker. It's a lot, you get this sense that everything's very sterile. It just doesn't have the warmth and the light of the first Jason's house and the first Jason's life. So it becomes quite clear why this second version of Jason would want to just, undo his life decisions, because it seems like despite his success, he's not a very happy person. He's not very content. The first Jason, the sweet Jason that we met, manages to convince Daniela that, hey, I promise you I'm not crazy. And he actually figures out how all this is possible, and he's impressed. It seems like this version of Jason had figured out something that he had been trying to do his whole life, and now he needs to figure out how to undo his work. Just before the episode ends, they have this lovely conversation about what their life must have been like. So the reason that Daniela and Jason are not together in this alternate universe is because Jason chose this career. He decided that being a father would be too much work, and unfortunately for that, she had to move on with her life. And so they have this conversation about what their life is like. And Jason is basically explaining that, life is, it has its ups and downs. Do I wish I accomplished more? Sure. But I don't regret a thing. We see this man desperately looking for her and trying to fix it. So it's very clear that, again, he's very content with his life decisions. And just when they're bonding and reconnecting, they are interrupted by the company that manufactured this box to make all this possible. They kidnap Jason and they shoot Daniela. And what the ramifications of that are, I'm so interested in finding out. Because if you die in one parallel universe, are you going to do all versions of you die? How does that work? I'm not a quantum physicist, but I was hooked. And so that's how episode 2 ends. Again, the pacing is fantastic. It gets to the point right away. I do love shows like this because they always get you thinking about what if. Like, I think it's very common for people to think, oh, what if I'd gone down this life path or this life path? But I don't think you could ever be 100% happy. It just comes down to priorities and understanding yourself and what you need to do to feel content. And I did appreciate very much the differences in Jason 1 and Jason 2. First, because you could actually see it. Second, it's very clear that one version of Jason is very content with his life. He's kind of a light. And this other version is very dark and manipulative. And, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that, maybe he went down the wrong path. I think I will review this weekly and have more detailed reviews. But for now, I highly recommend it. If you understand more about like the quantum physics of it all, please feel free to explain to people in the comment section below. But for right now, I am hooked. So you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.